Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Good to see everybody awake and ready for another day of party conference. And this is a Bright Blue event that we're doing in partnership with the British Chambers of Commerce. And it's called Getting Britain Booming Again, Reforming Our Economy. If you don't know Bright Blue, just to say we're an independent think tank that seeks to defend and improve liberal society. So we are liberal conservatives, and we have four main research themes: social policy, energy environment policy, education policy, and probably most relevant to this discussion, economic and employment policy. And over the 10 years that we've been in existence, we have seen over 75 original Bright Blue policies adopted by the government. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag BrightBlue and CPC24. You can also, if you say nice things, use the tweet handles @WeAreBrightBlue and @BritishChambers as well. So really we know for a long time that the UK's economy has not been growing very strongly, and productivity has been low relative to other developed countries, and living standards have been stagnant since the global financial crisis in the noughties. So in this debate, we're going to focus on, particularly with a new Labour government and a budget coming up, what we need to do to get growth going again. What are the reforms that are needed across a range of different areas, whether it's our employment, our education and skills regime, whether it's our taxation, whether it's our relationship with the EU, in terms of our kind of investment policies and our infrastructure policies. What are the types of measures that government needs to do, working in partnership with businesses, to achieve that higher growth and productivity, which we know is essential to raising living standards again, and ensuring that there's greater both individual and public prosperity. So how we're going to do this session is that I'm going to ask each of the panelists different questions and have a sort of Q&A with them for a period of time, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from you, from the floor. We have got people watching on the live stream as well, so wherever you are, on a beach somewhere, sunny, in much sunnier place than Birmingham, hello, and you can ask questions through the Slido link, which is at the bottom of the YouTube channel that you are watching at the moment. So please do ask questions, tell us your name and where you're from, where you are at the moment, make us all jealous. So let's get the questions going, but before I do that, I just will introduce each of the panelists and say that one of them is on their way. Typical conference, they are speaking at another event and then rushing along to this one. So to my near left, we have Kevin Hollenrake, MP, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade. To my near right is Siobhan Haviland, who's the Director General at the British Chambers of Commerce. Next to her is Vicky Price, who's the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. And then we do have Councillor Abby Brown joining us, who is the leader of the Stoke Trent Conservatives and the deputy leader of the LGA Conservative group. So I'm going to start with Siobhan. And I know the British Chambers of Commerce over the last 18 months has been running a programme called The Future of the Economy, which has been very much focused on how you raise growth and productivity. So I think, it'd be good to get the voice of business in this, in terms of what you think are the big issues coming out of that programme for how we achieve significantly higher growth and productivity by the end of this decade.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I hope you've all had a cup of coffee. I'm only on my second, so that's quite good going for this time of the morning. Start the day with Bloomberg Radio. That sort of definitely gets gets you going. So for those of you who don't know, the British Chambers of Commerce, we represent the 52 chambers of the UK, covering every region and nation, and slightly our best kept secret, 79 British chambers all around the world. So you have a friend in every port, I like to say. We have 80,000 or so businesses as our members, every size, every sector, from the largest FTSE to startup community. And our role is about making the UK the best place to start, grow and invest in a business. So growth and productivity clearly are very much at the core of that. We have a very large research programme. We run the Quarterly Economic Survey, UK's biggest private sector survey, 5,000 to 6,000 businesses a quarter. Treasury uses it, Bank of England, IMF more recently. I'm looking at Vicky because she is the head of our Economic Advisory Council, so she's going to be much better at this than me. So the data is showing the first half of this year definitely saw businesses uptick in confidence, but that has not yet really been translated into investment. And it's that investment by business that will drive the growth and productivity. So that's really what we want to see, stimulated. The future of the economy work, which you can find on the website, covered 5 broad areas. Green innovation, how we help businesses get to net zero, but also, how we help businesses develop new products and services in this sort of, growing sector. Hello.
Hello, take a seat.
Digital innovation, grasping the upsides of AI as businesses, that would definitely drive productivity, guarding against the downsides. People and work, so getting the skills we need. Local economies, our high streets, local tax, and last but not least, global Britain, so driving exports and FDI. I guess if I just pick out a couple of those that shorter in terms of, if we're thinking about the budget, which is only, as of today, 30 days away, that competitive investment environment is about looking at areas like extending full expensing, obviously brought in by the last government, and promoting investments such as green transition in the North Sea, for example. When I have the joy of travelling the country and meeting businesses, the number 1 or 2 thing they tell me is I can't get the right people with the right skills. It really is an obstacle to growth. So we want the government to look at using the tax system to help bring people back into work by offering them reduction on their taxes, for example, on health services. Skills planning, long-term skills planning, so adaptation of the apprenticeship levy, but also expansion of the local skills improvement plans, which I hope many of you have come across, which is business and local skills providers working together to teach the things that businesses need. And then we want a review, a full review of business rates, reform of business rates to help high street. And then lastly, I just touched on exports. So, trade has taken a bit of a battering over the last few years. We are one market, but there are 190 odd out there, depending on how you measure it. About 10% of UK businesses export. 10%, it's quite low. 50% of chamber members export, and that's because we know how to help businesses do it. And that is a massive lever for growth. Shadow Chancellor and Chancellor. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Siobhan. So, Kevin, I'm going to come on to you because, my view, and you may disagree, is that probably the prime reason the Tories lost the election was the public felt that the economic model just was not working. Private incomes, stagnant, state of public services, stagnant. And I'm just wondering, just reflecting on your time in government and the Tories' time in government, growth was obviously very low relative to historical performance. I get internationally, UK, not as bad, but historically it's been quite low. So I'm just wondering what levers you thought you wanted to pull a little bit more to get the growth that we really need. Just looking back, are there things that you think, gosh, we really should have done that?
Yeah, lots of things, and we probably won't go into all the reasons we lost the election, but it was numerous things. There weren't many governments around the world that survived post-COVID cost of living crisis in terms of getting re-elected. Add to that Partygate, Liz Truss, lack of delivery on the NHS, immigration, the economy, as you say, it was unwinnable for us. So we've got to learn lessons from that. We made our mistakes. We did some good stuff too through COVID, of course. But trying to separate all that out in terms of growth, and let's be honest about it, and I think you kind of alluded to it. If you look at the G7 growth since 2010, UK is third, faster than any of the European country, only slower than US and Canada. In terms of productivity since 1997 in the private sector has improved by 40%, improved by 10% since the pandemic, but it's flatlined in the public sector, completely flatlined. So this isn't, business to me is a strong horse that pulls the whole cart. We shouldn't demonise business like it's not doing a good job in terms of towing our public services along. It's doing its job. Yes, of course, we want to make growth easy. And you're right to say long-term trends in terms of growth, it's not quick enough. And we're going to create huge spending challenges unless we boost growth. So I guess reversing the equation, what would you do, what would you rather not have happened for us to be in a much better place now? Well, you wouldn't have had a financial crisis that really hit the UK, particularly because of our dependence on financial services. 2010, post that really hit the UK hard. You wouldn't have had Brexit, which affected business investment. You wouldn't have had COVID, you wouldn't have had the cost of living crisis, which hit the UK harder than most other nations. So all those things affected this. So let's not look at the UK and think, well, we're useless, we can't grow our economy. That's not it at all. So we've got to try and put those things behind us. And what we do now, and I agree with Siobhan, you've got to get business to invest. This is where we drive our productivity, our growth. Governments can't do that, only private sector can do that. To do that, first and foremost, for businesses, you need stability. And so we keep talking about stability, and that's one of the frustrations I have with the current government. And I think they're doing some good stuff in terms of their promises to reform planning, their promises to reform things like grid connections, even the stuff about investing for the long term in terms of capital investment, separating out from day-to-day recurrent spending, which I think is actually, for me, a sensible thing to do, because you won't get the infrastructure we need as a nation without that long-term investment. But talking about stability at the same time, you're throwing all the business tax incentives up in the air, not saying whether you're going to continue with them, is not good in terms of stability. So talking about stability at the same time, you're going to completely change the employment relationship in the workplace and have it supervised by a fair work agency that sounds horrendous to me, is not good for stability. And that's why the CBI say that 75% of businesses are more reluctant to hire right now. That is not good for investment. That's why the Business Growth Fund has said 74% of their members said the potential tax reforms on CGT will have a negative impact on growth. So this is not good. Let's be honest about it. This is not just bashing the government. So we need that consistency. We need to maintain full expensing, as Siobhan was saying. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to improve access to finance, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, where there is a huge gulf in there. We need to think about investing in the nation long term. I mean, just in terms of levelling up, which is important to me in terms of the North, this country is firing on one cylinder instead of four cylinders in terms of what it could be doing. If you really want to get growth and productivity, you've got to get the whole nation contributing to that growth. Economic disparity, if you look at gross value added, so productive output per capita, the North East versus the London and the South East, in relative terms, the gap is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. That took 30 years and $2 trillion to narrow that gap. So it is huge. So we've got to have, as well as this stuff we're doing in terms of the more immediate stuff, in terms of incentives and, for businesses to invest and stability, we also need a long-term strategic approach on things like infrastructure and skills.
I was struck by something that you said about all the sort of big events that happened which damaged Britain somewhat. And one was, you talked about Brexit, and we wouldn't have had Brexit, because so it made me think maybe you were being a bit sceptical of the path that we've taken in terms of the Brexit deal, and whether we need a renewed relationship with the EU to kind of reduce some of the frictions that some businesses are complaining about. Do you think Brexit was a mistake, and do you think we need a reset now?
No, I wasn't saying that at all. I was a Remainer, but I never argued once that our economy could not recover from a Brexit shock. But we can't avoid the fact that it was an economic shock. You just look at the business investment stats. there were good business investment was consistently going up, and then 2016 it completely stalled and flatlined. Now, I'm just saying, you're looking at it. Was that conducive to growth? Clearly not. Now we can recover from it. I'm not saying we should go back in the European Union. Not at all. I would not rejoin, and said that at the time when during the campaign was on. But you cannot say that has not had an economic impact, because it has. And we can, of course, we're going to improve that relationship, and over time the politics will drop out of this, and the sensible pragmatism will re-enter the space of trying to be more conducive to trade across the European Union. But we should also recognise that 73% of our exports are not goods to the European Union. There's a massive opportunity out there with the rest of the world that we should take advantage of, and that's part of the picture. But it is an economic shock. It has hit growth.
Okay, Vicky, I'm going to come to you because I've seen figures on levels of private and public investment in the UK being low compared to other countries, and we're just not building houses, infrastructure. That's the investment that can really spur growth. So I'm just interested in your reflections around investment patterns in the UK compared to other countries.
Yes, we are quite behind loads of others. I mean, on the government investment, infrastructure, but also R&D, which is really, really important when you're talking about encouraging growth and sustainable growth in the future and having a comparative advantage, if you like, in relation to other countries. We are laggards, really. We are among the lowest in the OECD, in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the developed world. And on business investment too, we invest a considerable smaller percentage of our GDP. The interesting thing is that the BCC's own forecast for this year suggests that business investment, private investment, business investment, will only grow by 0.3% in 2024. You can't have sustainable growth on that basis. You need something. And yes, as we heard from Siobhan, the BCC survey was sort of reasonably optimistic, but actually since the beginning, really, of August, we've seen a real decline in confidence happening, with loads of other surveys suggesting both business confidence has come down significantly and consumer confidence has come down significantly. If you don't get those two things right, then people won't spend and people won't invest. And that's the real problem. But it is true that when we're looking at where we were pre-financial crisis, and I think Kevin was quite right to emphasize the shock that we had. I was working for the civil service at the time, and in fact I was responsible for productivity in the UK economy, would you believe it? And we were doing quite well because we had a financial sector that was doing rather well. And it was all measured on how much each individual sector was earning per person. And of course the financial sector was doing rather well. Well, then we rethought the whole system because maybe some of those figures were not really right in terms of reflecting what was going on in the economy, and we had over-dependence in the financial sector. The real problem, though, additionally, was that a lot of our industries that were quite productive were declining, whether it was chemicals, mining, for example. And what we have done now is, I think, which is a good thing, businesses have refocused. So now we have the pharmaceutical sector, life sciences doing really well, the creative industry doing well. The financial sector has recovered, and of course we export, talking about Europe, quite a lot of our services still to Europe and doing rather well there, which is one of the things that really defied all expectations. We thought that would be really difficult. It's the goods area that has suffered significantly. You've seen the figures which suggest that between 21 and 23, our exports and imports fell with Europe by about just under 30% in each case, which is really, really worrying given that they're quite close, and it costs a lot more to export and import from elsewhere. And so there are other sectors, the creative industry, doing really, really well, and we need to worry a little bit about movement of people and how we can make sure that this doesn't suffer because we left the EU. Then of course renewables, all that where we have spent quite a lot of money, but in many of those areas where we have done reasonably well, there has been government intervention, positive, hopefully in most cases, by which I mean incentives to do various things, joint investment. The offshore winds area would not be happening if we as consumers and taxpayers were not prepared to pay quite a big price to get those wind farms to be put up. Because, as you remember, last year's auction attracted no bidders at all. Now we had to raise the price. Of course, we have to pay for this, but it is really a joint enterprise that is what is needed to get that investment going, and we haven't quite got to that point across loads of other sectors where that can happen. It seems to, for the moment, be happening only in some. Look at universities and how much they've been suffering recently as well. I think there needs to be a holistic approach to say, how can you get partnership between the public and the private sector to work better.
The government, the Conservative government said actually the full expensing they did on against corporation tax for investment in capital and plant and machinery, that was a massive business tax break. Do you think that is, and a lot of economists agreed with that was really what you needed to spur more private investment? Do you think that is materialising, it's going to materialise that investment on the back of that full expensing, or are there other measures or other updates that are needed to full expensing to do that?
Well, I think BCC was very much in favour of full expensing, and it does make sense. In fact, again, the business department, as I'm sure you're aware, you remember, was always in favour of capital allowances and improving those capital allowances, because that's the way you get the investment to happen. Now, what you've always got to watch is that it will be an element of things would have happened anyway. So is there a real additionality? And I think one of the issues that you need to watch more generally in terms of projects or any intervention of that sort is to make sure that you do your cost benefit, your impact assessment properly. Sometimes you may not have the choice because you absolutely need to give some extra push, even if you're going to lose some, in the sense that perhaps some of it would not be additional, simply because at various stages you need that extra push to happen. But generally, I think what has not been happening well enough has been doing proper evaluation of cost benefit, if you like, early on of projects like HS2, for example, and lots of others, which this government now has sort of abandoned in the short term. But also general cost benefit of everything that is done by government. We seem to get announcements, and then the cost benefit comes out and tells you actually this isn't going to raise any money anyway. So I think what needs to happen is a bit more of a grip on all those measures that could be introduced to really estimate in advance properly, as used to happen once upon a time, what the costs and benefits of that are. And we haven't really done that in the past well enough, even though, obviously we had COVID, where you had to sort of intervene, even though you lost perhaps loads of money, which went whichever way. But you had to do something. You had to do something with the financial crisis. And we had to intervene, even though, again, some of it would be perhaps not necessary. But you had no choice at the time. But now there is time, I think, to think a little bit about what works best and which sectors, an industrial strategy which absolutely has to focus on what can make Britain grow in a sustainable way.
Great, thank you, Vicky. I want to bring Abby in now. Kevin talked about the kind of imbalance in our economy, London in particular being the powerhouse, and the whole levelling up agenda, of course, was about trying to rebalance the economy, and you, I suppose, represent an area where the kind of levelling up agenda was targeted on. So thinking about what businesses need in Stoke to really grow and really scale up, what, in your mind, do you think is the kind of important things that they need from government in particular?
Okay. I think some of the things have already been touched on. I think there is a need for confidence in what happens, stability, but certainly some of what I've heard from businesses within Stoke-on-Trent area recently is that they are anxious to understand what the government's agenda is. They like some of the broader messaging, obviously concerned about some of the things that they see. But actually, Stoke-on-Trent's been a big beneficiary of cash, as you say, under the Levelling Up agenda, over £100 million worth of investment, second largest movement of civil servants out of Whitehall. Is that going to carry on? Where's the council within this? One or two of the plans, certainly that I'd led, have been scrapped. And I think whilst overall business see that as being disappointing that some of those things have gone, actually there's still the potential to build on that in terms of the Home Office hub coming to the city and things like that. But I think it's that understanding of where next. With my local government lens on this, I think we would very strongly and have always said that local authorities shouldn't be in this competitive tendering space where we're having to bid to government continually for cash to do things. But nonetheless, how is the government going to approach supporting areas like Stoke-on-Trent? And as a Conservative, if I was to be very pure about my beliefs, I'll say, well, you know, the market will provide. But the reality is I don't believe that. And when I was leader of the council, I was very clear that I had to intervene because I expected better for my area, and that meant I had to go out and maybe do some quite unconservative things. But my place deserved an opportunity, and I think now we need to understand a little bit, and I think business is keen to hear more about where the new government is going to go, and as you say, you know, what's going to happen for places like Stoke-on-Trent that have been big beneficiaries, albeit of totemic capital funding, but actually, you know, we need investment into revenue services too.
I mean, you know, a lot of economists think, you know, what is really needed is for an area to be a magnet for talent. And I think, you know, what we've seen in recent decades perhaps is a little bit of a brain drain of talented people who are highly motivated, highly educated, leaving areas, for example, like Stoke-on-Trent, to go and find opportunities in London. So how does Stoke try and attract those people? What are the things that are needed to try and get this skills and talent in the area to make sure that businesses want to invest in those places?
So I think that there's two sides to that, isn't there? There's what I found quite interesting when I became deputy leader in 2015. I was given very clearly a free roaming ability by my leader at the time. He was like, go off and do all the outward facing things. There's the number of secret Stokies that I discovered all across the country who'd either grown up in Stoke-on-Trent or had some kind of connection with it. And not that I'm much into name dropping, but I will drop a few names. So Liam Booth-Smith, who I'd met previously when he was chairman of a think tank. We actually went to the same school, you know, ends up in number 10 Downing Street. And a number of other people who you develop relationships with. You know, Greg Hands, as export minister, would always tell me that he would take North Staffordshire ceramics across the world to give as gifts because we produce the best ceramics in the world, and what a fantastic present to receive. So I think, firstly, there's something about keeping, or not keeping, Stokies in Stoke, although some people may disagree with me on that, but something about how do you encourage an environment where people feel they can be successful in their place. And one of the nice things for me over the last 12 months has been meeting members of the business community who are being successful within their place. We have a really strong chamber within the city, and they're kind of very much into how do we support local entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And we have some fantastic businesses as well, household names, JCB, Michelin, based within the city. So there is something about how do you encourage people to recognise the potential to stay where they are. The other bit of that then is, of course, how do you say to people, we'll come to Stoke? And, you know, one of my most eye-opening moments going down to London, which I still view as a bit of a novelty experience, despite having gone down there for 8 years, was when people would say to me, did you come down the night before? Like I lived on Mars. It's 90 minutes on the train. Yeah. Which is perfectly doable. My husband actually commutes to London twice a week to work, and I know lots and lots of other people who do it. I wouldn't want to do it every day. Clearly, it's quite draining, but it's perfectly manageable to do that. And I think then the challenge is around, for example, HS2. I remember back in the day, a very long time ago, when I was one of a very small number of Tories who were championing HS2. Suddenly it became really in vogue to do, and then we went the other way. And for residents, it's hard to understand that, but for the business community, it's totemic about our importance as a place. It wasn't actually about the extra 15 minutes. It was about recognition that the West Coast mainland is really important, connects places like Stoke, like Stockport, like Macclesfield, that people are getting onto. The West Coast mainland between Stoke-on-Trent and Manchester is actually one of the busiest parts of the whole route. So it's not about necessarily that immediate saving. It's about the importance of secondary cities like Stoke that haven't achieved their potential, but are actually powerhouses of manufacturing and some really great stuff that's going on, and how do we lift the profile of them. So I think it's, you know, again, back to your opening question to me, really, in a way, you know, I'm waiting to hear with anticipation about where not just the big cities, but actually the second-tier cities like Stoke-on-Trent are going to stand. And equally, that is a question for us as Conservatives, and for me to continue to champion cities like my own.
Yeah. Can I just make one more point very briefly? One thing we haven't talked about yet is, in terms of productivity, can you imagine the four panellists here? There's a big pile of gravel, and we've got 4 shovels, and we've got to move that big pile of gravel from there over to there 100 yards. And we're all going to do this, and one of us is sat on our shovel doing nothing. The rest of us are shoveling. And that's the UK economy, because 25% of our working age population don't work. So, and that number is growing. So we talk about it's not just the UK that's growing too slowly, it's a lot of the developed world. The demographics are around that, but lots of people are working age as well. We've got to get some of those people back into work. 900,000 more people on long-term sick since the pandemic, and that's not just physical sickness, this is also mental health. And that's not sustainable. The cost of that will be another £30 billion a year to the taxpayer within 5 years. That is damaging productivity, and we've got to look at it like that, as well as being a cost to the taxpayer.
Interestingly, I've seen some studies from the growth that we had in the 90s and noughties, and I think about 2/3 of that can be explained by an expansion in economic activity, i.e. more people in the workplace, and whether that's parental employment, immigration. And then the other third around increases in productivity. But really the key point here is that human capital really matters. And it strikes me that, you know, the last Labour government, the new Labour government, and then maybe in the early part of the coalition government, the focus was very much on higher education and increasing the number of people, increasing access to that. And then there seems to be a bit of a shift, which is too many people are going to university. We need to focus a lot more on vocational skills, increase apprenticeships, hence the apprenticeship levy that came through. But actually the number of apprenticeship starts has actually fallen. So, Siobhan, I'm just interested in your perspective around getting that human capital. What are the changes you think we need to focus on now to kind of get the skills that British businesses are looking for, not only in terms of into businesses, but also when people are at businesses to help them progress?
Yeah, indeed, it's a huge challenge. I think that investment in skills needs to be seen as an investment, not a cost, and we need to be better at explaining return on that investment, which we are starting to think about. I don't know how many of you have come across local skills improvement plans. I'm hoping Abby has. Kevin certainly has. This is an initiative that was brought in a couple of years ago by the Conservative government to get local businesses to talk about what skills they need now and in the future, and work hand in hand with skills providers, FE, HE, schools across the piece, to teach those skills. And actually, it's been running about 2.5 years now. It was hard work to begin with. It's hard to engage SMEs. They're trying to just, keep the doors open. And actually, it's hard for them to understand what skills they're going to need in 5 years' time. But actually, the momentum of getting those people in a room and talking about what they need has been incredibly impressive. 65,000 businesses have been part of this discussion. And then the colleges have been investing now. We're beginning to see that investment into what businesses need to be taught. So it's really got some great momentum. The funding runs out in March. We really want that to continue. We need to give it that long-term, stability rather than the constant changing, because we're really beginning to see a change there. And obviously we have a new body in Skills England that's been announced this summer. So we hope that they will be able to set a broader strategy for that sort of skills piece. Because the other area, two other areas really, apprenticeship levy, of course, again, we think it's been, in general, very successful. Businesses, of course, thought it as a bit of a tax at the beginning, but actually now would recognise it's working really well. It needs more flexibility for smaller businesses. It needs to be more modular, easier to use. But lifelong learning. I mean, what else once you're in work? We all sort of feel like we stopped learning at 21. But actually, how can we build a culture, I think, in business of that continuing learning? And the lifelong learning entitlement, which again was brought in last government, but it sort of feels like it's a bit on hold. We're waiting with interest to see where we're going to go with that. So there's some good things that have been brought in. We need to build on those.
So it's always interesting in terms of what are the kind of growth sectors that we need to prepare for and have the skills for. So we had a panel yesterday about the future of the nuclear sector, and obviously, power station hasn't been built in decades, and now there's a sort of a bit of a push for new reactors to be built. But do we have the workforce in place to do that? And in terms of the past 10 years, there's definitely the growth sectors, kind of biosciences, tech, the green economy. So I'm just interested, particularly with AI as well. are there particular sectors you think are kind of crown jewels for the UK, or things that we need to look out for in the future, where we need to think a lot more in terms about how do we get the workforce in a right place to be able to, have the skills in those sectors and compete internationally in those sectors?
100%. We have been pushing the last government and this for an industrial strategy, the UK, because those of us who run businesses know that you have to work out what your competitive advantage is to everyone else, and then you have to talk about that and double down on it. So what is our competitive advantage as a country? What are those sectors? But it's also places. We need to cross a sectoral plan with a place-based plan, and really focus on those. And that will help us understand what skills we need to fulfil the growth in those sectors. And if you take nuclear, for example, at Hinckley in Somerset, the Chamber of Commerce actually ran the supply chain for Hinckley. And I don't know if you've been there, but the regeneration in that place because of the nuclear power station and the skills, a big college was built there to provide the skills. Those skills are then moved over to Sizewell C, over in Suffolk. Again, the supply chain benefit to the local economy is incredible, and we'll obviously continue to build around the country. So where it's done well, where you can go in, you can use local suppliers, build the skills, and then move those skills around the country, really successful.
So Vicky, we've been kind of focusing in a little bit on the kind of energy transition, and I suppose the big kind of systemic change that we're experiencing and will experience in the decade ahead is that sort of net zero transition. So I'm just thinking in terms of, the impact on businesses. Some people who are really sort of pushing net zero say this is going to be transformational for investment, for jobs. What's your sort of assessment of the net zero transition on the economy and on businesses in terms of its net effect?
Can I say this is a rather big question?
Yes, sorry.
In terms of the net effect at the end of the day. I mean, it is going to require an awful lot of investment. A huge amount, because you need to also change the infrastructure we've got, whether it's investing in the grid and so on. And there is an estimate by Ernst & Young, which I was in the FT the other day. Their report suggests that we need to invest 1.6 trillion by 2040 to cover all those needs, including the infrastructure needs. But that, I have to add, that includes defence as well. But it's still transport, which needs to be revolutionised. And energy, of course, so a transport in a way that deals also with this net zero issue and all the energy investment that's required. So every aspect of what we produce will have to be done differently. So I always find it difficult to think of the green sector as against the rest. Everyone talks about there'll be so many new green jobs. What we really mean is that the jobs that we're doing now in a certain way are going to be done in a different way in the future. But it also requires that big investment to be able to do it. And we in the UK, don't have an expertise. For some reason, we don't seem to attract battery storage or development companies. We do for a bit and then they disappear. And we're not the only country that has this difficulty. I'm afraid we can't compete very easily with China in this respect. So we have to think of really how we can improve on the technology that's out there, the storage capability. So a lot of what we need to invest in, where we'll have our competitive advantage that Siobhan talked about, is in the technological side. What can we add to whatever is out there? We're not going to be battery centre of Europe, I'm afraid, however much we may have tried. On nuclear, you were quite right about the skills side. There was always the concern that if we didn't do anything on nuclear, and you've seen how long it's actually taken for a nuclear power plant to come out, and what incentives we had to give again for it to happen, what we're all going to be paying for ages in the future because of what the strike price was in order for this to happen, how the costs have increased so significantly, etc., etc. But the main worry had been all along that people who knew about the nuclear sector were getting old and were going to retire. So how do you train all those people who are now needed? But it is true, I think, what Siobhan was saying, that people all around the areas where nuclear is benefit. Strangely, the communities want it because there's quite a lot of activity that happens. A bit like house building, which is very local and creates loads of jobs, so that's why it's a good thing. But there is a shortage of skills, and if you think of the small firms and the short-term costs that they now have to bear to bring anyone in on a visa, whatever we may think about Europe, it was easy and cheap to bring people in without having to pay all this. For the SMEs, it's been a disaster because they can't afford the cost that they have to get involved in to bring people in. And there is a calculation again in VFT, there I say, only because I had a long journey this morning, and there was this other article which just looked at the worker curves that we have seen and the overseas student curves, which are supposed to cost business and the economy about 40 billion over the next 10 years. This is an assessment done by the Home Office. The costs, particularly to small firms, are very, very significant. So yes, we talk about skills development and training. And actually, the other interesting, I mean, it's fascinating looking at all the statistics. We do train people. We spend quite a lot on training by comparison to other countries, which is quite surprising, except it's all on health and safety and induction training. It's not so much in the other areas. And talking about what's happened in the last 14 years, if I may, or 15 years, money going to FE colleges has come down very significantly. And that's been one of the reasons why we don't have the sort of technical ability that perhaps some other countries do. And we do have real problems in guiding the younger generation when they complete the GCSEs to move into some technical side training, which I think is really what we need to be doing.
Great. Okay. Kevin, quickly.
Well,
open it up to
there's so
questions.
much there to come back on. But I mean, Vicky, it's not right to say the UK can't produce batteries. We've got a new plant in Bridgewater, Somerset, 4,000 people, produce half the batteries for EVs that the UK needs. And the Tata, who are investing, that's Agritas it's called, investing here because we have a flexible labour market. They want to be here. They see the UK as a place to invest. So energy prices is their biggest issue. I'm very sceptical about an all-encompassing industrial strategy, I've got to say. That's not to say we don't have sector-to-sector based deals, but to say somehow the UK can plan the entire economy. I mean, the question was which sectors are going to be the growth sectors of the future? Well, the tech sector wasn't a result of an industrial strategy, yet it's the third biggest in the world. There's only US and China bigger than ours. There's some fantastic businesses come out of that. And some of the unicorns we've got in this country, Brewdog, it's a brewer, started in the garage. You've got Gymshark, a clothing manufacturer. You've got Castori. Again, we start with the government startup loan, all unicorn companies. We should avoid trying to think we can plan this entire economy. That's not to say we shouldn't provide support. It'll be aerospace, the advanced manufacturing plant, automotive, where it's needed. And of course, alongside that should come skills plans. And I agree with Siobhan about local skills improvement plans, because you get hopefully a good elected mayor who can determine what the right skills and needs are in those areas and connect businesses into colleges. In my experience, businesses are crying out to get involved in terms of what skills they need. And that's how to do that on a localised basis, rather than the government go and sit in a darkened room for 18 months to draft a report, as Greg Clark did, that nobody reads and doesn't have a precise impact, because you can't pick winners. You can't guess what's ahead. So really, and I've got to say, just a final one, I would personally completely scrap the apprenticeship levy. I think for us as a government, dictating to businesses how they train their staff is completely wrong. And really, the government should be doing less rather than more. And it should be making sure that businesses can make those choices in a joined-up approach with local leaders, supported by an industrial strategy where it's needed on a sector basis. I think that's the way to try and crack that nut.
Very interesting. Right, people are crying out to ask questions. So if you could tell us your name and where you're from, that would be great. Please keep it pithy, because we've got limited time and want to get lots of questions. So we'll start with this lady here.
Thank you. I'm Lois. I'm a lead volunteer advocate for the Royal Osteoporosis Society, and I was encouraged to hear what you were saying about 25% not being in people that could actually work, not being in employment. My story is having osteoporosis, breaking my hand, not being able to work, and having no support to be able to actually re-enter that kind of, continue to actually pay my tax and have a job. And to point that you were making there, Vicky, about actually the cost of cost-benefit analysis. So they've done a lot of that in the medical side of things, where actually if we put in a fracture liaison service, they would fund that, and they would make the money back in 18 months. Within 18 months, it would self-fund itself, and that would enable people to actually get back into employment as well, and keep people in a better health for longer. So I will be able to continue to work, although I've got osteoporosis early on, later on into my life. So I'll be able to contribute to the economy more. So there's more join up between what's going on in the health sector, I believe, and then actually impacting into the economy. And on to your point, Siobhan, as well, about what is the British Chamber of Commerce actually doing to support? You've gone through the list of what you're doing to support, trade and things, but what are you doing to support people actually getting into, having disabilities, being able to remain in the workforce and actually can take, to have employers able to access that as well, and to tap into that resource that you've got as well, which are very talented people who want to work, but for other circumstances just can't.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to take a round of questions. There's a question there for you, Siobhan. This gentleman here on the second row.
The prolonged, underinvestment in the UK industry. We had a period of really stable low interest and effectively really stable economic environment generally and political environment relative to historically. If we were not going to invest in this period where the expectation of interest rate is so low, is business industry ever going to invest?
And sorry, what's your, without being...
Sorry, apologies, Mohammed Mia.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. This gentleman here, third row.
Hello, I'll stand up so you can all hear me. I'm Dominic May. I own and run an engineering business, 185 people I employ, take on about 10 apprentices a year. I'm disappointed that nobody's talking about what I think are the three key drains of productivity. We will never get business booming again. We've got the highest taxation for business, both direct and indirect taxation, 12% on insurance policies, things like that. We've got the highest regulation. We spend our whole time owning and running a business to deal with regulation rather than getting new orders, managing the productivity and completing the contract. And the final thing is we've got the highest energy cost in the whole world. These are the three biggest drains on productivity. We will never get Britain booming again or reform our economy until we deal with those. Why isn't the panel talking about those three things?
Okay, thank you, Dominic. And then just a final one, this gentleman here.
I'm from Holland, East Yorkshire. I'm previous chairman of Holland Humber Chamber of Commerce, president. Kevin, you talk about the difference between productivity and investment and GVA in the northeast in comparison to London. The Republic of Ireland is off the scale in terms of its, apparently, all because of sweetheart deals with American tech, but it's not real. And neither is it real, the difference between ourselves and London. I'm a Yorkshire lad like you, know it's the best place in the world to live, and I think we should be marketing ourselves properly. All the PLCs, major PLCs in Hull, around there, are headquartered in the main in London. Reckitt's in Slough. All their high-paid jobs are therefore go on Slough's productivity and Slough's GVA, not on Hull's. It suited our Labour Council to, for years, go with a begging bowl saying that, look, we're the bottom of the league on everything, give us more investment. Where in actual fact, if we're investing to the world or marketing ourselves to the world, we should be showing ourselves where we are, and it's a great place to come and live, the best place in the world, and we should be out there making our points.
What was your name, sorry?
Mike Whitehead.
Great, thank you. Right, Siobhan, particularly that first question, I don't know if you wanted to come back.
So Lewis, we have very recently published a report from our Equity Commission, put an Equity Commission together a year ago, launched on International Women's Day. It looked at a really diverse set of challenges for people coming to the workforce, particularly for SMEs, because a lot of small business owners are worried they're going to do the wrong thing, so they just don't do anything. We're saying, we know it's difficult, let's help you. So I can go to our website, have a look at it, love to hear your views on it. And also, hopefully, you will have seen this on your seats, but on workplace health, we really want to see the new government look at using the tax system to help offer better health services in work so that you, for example, aren't worried about going back to work because you're going to get some health support. I was talking to a large retailer recently who they've given all their staff, thousands of staff, access to a virtual GP. They gave them a bonus at the same time. No one was talking about the money. They were all talking about access to the virtual GP and how great that was. And that's so simple, isn't it? So I think there's just a couple of examples there. And I just would maybe just loop back to the tax question there from Dominic. We absolutely are talking to the government and both governments, previous and future, about business tax. We want full reform of business rates. It's not fit for purpose. It's not driving a thriving high street. And that tax example was then sort of, helping business reduce tax to offer health services.
Great, thank you. Kevin, particularly the question that Dominic asked about the sort of drag on productivity, just reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, just Mohammed quickly. I mean, the business needs stability. That's why it's not been investing, and I pointed that right at the start, is that's been the problem. It's not so much interest rates, and you're right to say it's cheap to borrow. Why businesses investing when you're facing some real structural challenges to the economy and instability? That's why it's not been. I think there will in the future, as long as we have a stable policy-making approach and we don't get some of the international issues we've seen in recent years. Dominic, I mean, yes, I agree with lots of things you're saying. I did talk about energy costs, actually, when I was talking earlier, and when I was talking about Agritas, and that's about investment in renewables, and that has hit businesses hard. We put the supercharger in place to try and help, but you're right to say that's an issue. Regulation, absolutely. I talked about the apprenticeship levy. That's a regulation in its own right. Business rates is a massive regulation too. I do want to try and strip out regulation. Well, and that's going to get a lot worse the way we're going. And in terms of some of the plans you got from Labour, you want to push back very hard on those. Tax laws, I've got to say, you can't put £500 billion into the economy, largely to save 500,000 businesses, and then say, we're not going to pay that money back. You can't do that. So there's a big debt overhang from there. So corporation tax did have to go up. I hope those tax levels will come down, expect them to, but we cannot come down unless we tackle this point with 9.3 million people out not working and a lot being carried by the state. So that's where your money's going, and we need to try and resolve that. Can I just on Mike's questions as well? I mean, totally right, but I mean, I went to Croydon doing some canvassing for one of my colleagues the other day, and I went to Victoria Station. I had a choice of going an overground train, an underground train, and I got there and walked out of the station and a tram went past me. And the transport infrastructure in London is one of the reasons why it's so successful. Our transport infrastructure is terrible. You can't build Northern Powerhouse Rail from Hull to Liverpool, which it needs, connecting Leeds to Bradford to Manchester. This stuff has a real-world effect over a long time. And that's one of the reasons why the North, precious to you and I, is not economically as productive as it needs to be. That's some of the reasons why we need to, one of the boxes we need to tick, other things as well.
Abby, I didn't know whether you wanted to pick up on Mike's question about sort of London capturing a lot of the economic benefit. Kevin's obviously talked about transport infrastructure. I didn't know if you had any other observations on why.
Yeah, sure. I think Kevin said that nobody read Greg Clark's papers. Well, I did, and I also read the Harrington Review as well, which I would certainly direct anybody who's interested in terms of FDI to read. So when I was leader of Stoke-on-Trent, and when I was deputy leader as well, I spent a lot of time going and trying to secure inward investment. And firstly, one of the things that I was very struck by, so Stoke is 6 towns, and I immediately realised that was a crazy platform to put yourself on. You want to talk about being a city, so that's what I did. But the other thing was I would often go to things, and although there'd be government ministers there, they'd be hiding. And as a local authority leader, I would be challenged around why I'm going, how much it's costing, what I'd be doing. So I would mercilessly flog myself for 15 hours with photos of a whole range of people. I would have back-to-back panels, as I've done here. I think this is about my 8th panel here, and there's no need for me to be on panels any longer. I don't lead anything. I'm just interested in contributing to the debate. So I would work really hard so I could demonstrate to my taxpayers why it was a great thing to send me there, and then I would demonstrate what I'd brought back. But at those same events, I would meet ministers, but they wouldn't be doing any comms. They'd be hiding. And I would go to events and it would be kind of, don't tell anybody we're here. And you just think, well, I'm defending this as the leader of like a relatively small city, and yeah, you are leading the country. And I think that's one of the things, a message certainly, that firstly, it's good to see lots of my peers go to things like UK Reef and promote their places. It's a fantastic opportunity to go and do place leadership. But actually what we want from both this government and from the Conservatives in future, if we're to form governments, is to be confident in our industries and in our places. I just wanted to touch very quickly on Dominic's question about energy. So North Staffordshire is the home of Ceramics UK. It's more than plates and cups. Ceramics and advanced materials do tremendous things. We put panels onto rockets going to space. We produce stuff where when you clean your teeth, it fills your fillings. But ceramics is a hugely energy-intensive industry, and Ceramics UK over the last few years have been lobbying hard to the government around how we do that. Some really great technology around sintering that's come forward. But actually, it is real concern, not just to North Staffordshire, where we have the greatest concentration of these manufacturers, but actually up and down the country, whether it's brick making, tile making, all sorts of stuff that goes on. So, I think, we need to work out how we can get in there. Lots of jobs at stake, certainly in my part of the world, and it's important that we land that message around the manufacturing that goes on offered in these places, but actually champion in place.
Great,
Yes,
thank you.
I've never hidden as a minister, and I'll never hide as a shadow minister, I promise you.
Right, final question, because I'm conscious of time. So we've got 4. It's got to be maximum 1 sentence. No embedded clauses. It has got to be pithy. So, this gentleman here.
You've just defeated me already, but I'll be as quick as I possibly can. I had the benefit of speaking to our Prime Minister for 1 minute. This was about 6 months ago. I've got all the notes in my pocket that I gave to him. At the end of 1 minute, he said, I don't think I agree with you. And I think that's where we've gone wrong. As a country, we need to take big decisions. There are massive decisions. We need to increase the workforce, but with no immigration. Let people leave school at 16 that don't really want to do A-levels, they don't want to go to university. The retirement age needs to be 70, not 66. So the proportion of people in the country that we have now, and I think we're at the maximum level personally, you're increasing the workforce. That's what we need. We need to teach people how to work. We need to teach people how to have the input into what
Great,
we need.
thank you.
I had 3 other things.
No, okay. Let's be fair to other people. Okay, this lady here.
I'm a property developer, and in that industry, we don't have access to funding easily. We have to rely on bridge loan always. We don't have access to funding from the high street lenders. NatWest, highly fact, they wouldn't lend on construction. Until the houses are completed, then they will lend on mortgages. How is government going to give us access to funding through the homes again?
Thank you. And then this gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. Anthony McKenna. I used to work for the Bedfordshire Chamber of Commerce as a policy and research officer. One of the things I found so annoying about the last government was their lack to respond to the review of the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. According to latest reports, that would add 50 billion to the economy annually. And I just want to ask the panel, do you welcome what the Prime Minister has said about making it a cluster hub?
The Oxford-Cambridge Arc. This gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Bilal Akhtar. I'm from Guildford, Deputy Leader in Guildford Group. I'm really sorry to say, Kevin, but I will slightly disagree with on apprenticeship levy part, because I think that is so important for young students nowadays, and they realise the potential of that thing after such a long time, that how important apprenticeship is for them. So, Siobhan, would you agree with that? Scrapping the
Great. Okay, thank you. And then this one gentleman. No, lots of embedded clauses. So yours have to be
very
literally one sentence.
Thank you, panel. Tim Johnston, Isle of Man Government. Has Britain lost its confidence in? Has it lost its competitive edge? And is the risk-reward balance, especially with regulation, gone too far?
Thank you. Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask the panel for concluding remarks. Maybe pick up on one or a couple of the questions. So we'll start with Vicky.
Okay. On whether since I remember the last question more easily, on whether the UK has just lost its confidence, if you like, or its whatever mojo, is that what it's called?
Yes.
In a way. Well, I mean, I have to say that in terms of investment, because there was an earlier question about that, we are no longer seen, even though the numbers of investment of projects is quite high, it's very high, still lots of things happening. But in terms of the size, we seem to have lost the ability to be seen as a gateway to Europe, and we're not valued as highly. I mean, the companies that we've got do not attract the same valuations as they would do, for example, in the US, and we're losing quite a lot of them who are going there. So I think that something has been lost and something needs to come back, and I think that's a really big issue and a fault we've got at present. Now, how you can rebuild that, I don't know. So in terms of, I mean, just thinking about some of the questions, funding really important. Not only, of course, does one have to look around and see whether there's venture capital or equity capital or anything else that is available. That has been, in general, more available in the UK than is the case in Europe. But nevertheless, I think there are areas where there is still lagging. And right now, I think funds are trying to decide whether the UK is a good place to invest in. Whether we're talking about tax, of course, and whether tax really matters in terms of decisions that companies make to come into this country. All the location studies I was ever involved with, and I was a partner at KPMG in charge of those studies for a while, showed that actually the tax system was not the decision maker for firms. It would be other things. It would be culture. It would indeed be regulation. It would be the competitive environment. It would be the support from government. It would be the availability of land. And they would choose a section of the, admittedly for the Japanese, it was proximity to golf courses, it seemed at the time. But otherwise, it's not tax, which is the most crucial issue. But the cost of production is. And I think you're quite right about electricity prices, energy costs being very high, but also people. Right now, finding the right people, training them, are they really trained? So that brings the cost of production up. Those are the main decisions that are being, the main things that decisions are being dependent on.
Great, thank you. Siobhan.
So Oxford and Cambridge ARC, yes, absolutely. We have had them in the organisation with the 5 chambers CEOs that run across that ARC. But I would say I think it needs to be part of a wider infrastructure strategy. So if we think about return on investment, is it better to start with Northern Powerhouse Rail and then go to the ARC? Or actually can we do both with the right public-private partnership? On the app levy, I've worked with Kevin for years. I had no idea that Kevin didn't think the apprenticeship levy. When he said that, I was like, what? Anyway, no, we and our businesses are big fans of the apprenticeship levy. As I said, it needs adaptation because it is too structured for smaller businesses to deal with easily. So we need some adaptation there. And yeah, I think we have lost our confidence as a nation. I think we need to work out what Brand Britain 2.0 is. And I think we need to go out there full bore and tell the world what a great place it is to start, grow and invest in a business.
Kevin, I presume the scrapping of the apprenticeship levy is not official Conservative Party policy.
No, it isn't actually, no. But it's something we've been banging on for a long time. I'll just say that if you like. I'm not against apprenticeships. I'm just saying, and a lot of your people who are in favour of it, Siobhan, will not be paying the levy because you only pay if you've got a payroll level of 3 million or more. So it's a very inefficient system. But apprenticeship, if SMEs or bigger companies think it's a good idea to train their staff through apprenticeships, perfectly fine. But for us to dictate that's what they should do is, to me, is fundamentally wrong. In terms of the points, I agree with you in terms of getting more people back into work, as I've said a number of times, 9.3 million people. We might disagree slightly in how we do it, and I'm not going to form Conservative policy on raising the retirement age to 70 on this panel right now. But in principle, I agree with you. Access to finance, it is the biggest thing for SMEs, and property development is one of the things that banks don't like to lend on because it's seen as speculative, and the capital requirements imposed upon it by the PRA and the FCA make that more difficult. One thing I've long advocated, and hopefully you've heard me say this before, Siobhan, regional mutual banks. Our big banks do a great job, as do our challenger banks, which lend more than 50% of all lending now. But every other G7 nation has regional mutual banks, which work on a relationship with their businesses, which means they can identify the good business people from the speculators, and because that's when we're in 2008, of course. Clusters, yes, great. Oxford, Cambridge, wonderful. Oxford and Cambridge is a pretty prosperous place already, of course, but we want to make it more prosperous, brilliant. But what I do object to is there was an interministerial group on levelling up, headed by Michael Gove, and we were looking at specific conurbations around the UK which needed levelling up. And the last one we had to read all these papers before we went on to this meeting. And the two places we were trying to level up were Barrow-in-Furness, fair enough, and Cambridge. Cambridge does not need levelling up. There are other parts of the country are much more ingrained. I'm just saying that of course clusters are really important. Not against Oxford, Cambridge corridor, all those kind of things. Brilliant. But there are lots of places around this country we need to focus on in terms of bringing those people back into economic prosperity. Confidence, I don't think the UK has lost confidence, sir. But you look at, I say, the second largest tech sector in the world, in terms of inward investment, the second largest inward investment in the world, our stock of inward investment. Many people want to invest in the UK. Have we got some things wrong in the past? And I alluded to them earlier. I think we have. But I think business now sees great opportunity. I mean, look at the businesses we have in the UK, some which I named before. These are world-leading businesses, either from start-up to scale-up, or indeed businesses that have been here for a long, long time. But have we got regulation? Is it overburdensome? Of course it is. And not just the regulation itself, it's the way we regulate. At the moment, we regulate the employment relationship in the 32 million people at work through something called employment tribunals. It costs £80 million a year. It's generally not a big burden on business. It's a big deterrent not to do something wrong, an employment tribunal. It's ex-post regulation, £80 million a year. The FCA, who is anti-regulation, so you do everything up front, all these people are going ticking boxes and checking your files, costs £1 billion a year in regulation. Massive impact on financial services. And now, what we're going to do now, apparently through the Fair Work Agency, Angela Rangers, piling into your offices with inspection rights and civil fining powers. How much will that cost? It's going to be a phenomenal cost on business, not just in terms of things like fines, but also in terms of the regulatory burden. Push back, don't go quietly, make sure the Labour government understand that this will be massively detrimental to growth.
Abby, final thoughts?
One of the things that I enjoyed most about being a local authority leader was the opportunity to engage with business both on an individual basis but also through my Chamber of Commerce, and actually always really impressed by how well engaged businesses were, how much they wanted to engage with us as a local authority, with me as an individual, and actually continue to do so and have lots of really great conversations with businesses in my local area. But I was always then surprised sometimes by the finesse of some of those conversations versus the ones I would often have with the general public, who often don't understand the risk and reward of people who establish business, how actually we want to see growth within our cities, but they don't seem to realise that there is a profit element in there because, of course, they get paid, and how they follow that back then to how we do development and things like that there. And again, from an education point of view, I am unbelievably the parent of an 18-year-old, and the world has moved on so much since I was at school and university. And I think actually we need, as a political party, to utilise some of that expertise we've gained from having conversations with the business community to have that wider conversation, to talk more to the public about the wealth creators within our society and about how it's important that the public sector works with business, but equally how we better inform the public around education and skills. That there is far more on offer now than GCSEs and A-levels when I was at school, and there's lots and lots of other opportunities there. So I think actually this is quite an exciting time for us as a political party to utilise. We've got the space to have that wider conversation, and certainly I think the role for business within that to talk to us as politicians. Kevin is clearly up for a big debate on all sorts of things, but also local authority councillors are, whether they're in charge or not. I would hope that my colleagues are keen to have a conversation for us then as a political party to take that feedback, what you thought we did well, what you thought we didn't do so well, to make sure that we will be the future party of government moving forward.
Thank you, Abby. And one of the big conversations I hope the Conservative Party has, actually this gentleman here on the front row talked about increasing the retirement age. I mean, the OBR did an analysis which suggests that our public debt, net public debt, will be 300% of GDP in the coming decades. It's just around 100% at the moment.
Only 270%.
270%, right.
Unless
we change something, and the big thing is the cost of an ageing society, the cost of the pensions and health, and I think it's a major thing that we need to focus on. So anyway, I kind of plea for focus on that. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Very grateful to the British Chambers of Commerce for partnering with us on the event. Thank you for everybody watching on the live stream. And also to those who attended in person. Just to say, we're going to carry on the conversation for 15 minutes or so. So there's some networking time. You can speak to the speakers if they dare stay, and amongst yourselves. And I think there's some refreshments outside. So please feel free to stay around. But if I could just also say, please give a round of applause to our speakers.